Let's read chapter 6 of Crucial Conversations to improve our communication skill. We're in part 2, so we've already done the preparatory work of planning the conversation, and now we're about to actually speak. We're in the Learn to Look for chapter 6, and this starts off with an example of a conversation of an executive meeting where basically things turn tense. They turn into a crucial conversation. Corinne is the CEO. She's offering a lot of feedback. No one is really arguing, and then Marcos pushes back using absolute language. The idea of this anecdote is that apparently Marcos was creating the issue because he's pushing back with absolute language, but in reality, Corinne sort of set the stage for this problem by controlling and interrupting and not letting other people talk. In addition, a lack of time at the end of a meeting can cause rushing, and that can lower communication quality. So this anecdote sets the stage for us to watch for conditions of what might trigger a crucial or a negative conversation. The authors suggest dual processing, thinking not only about what is being said, but how it's being said, tone of voice, and so on. The authors note that dual processing is difficult when you're in the middle of an argument, and they suggest that it takes a combination of knowledge and practice to figure this out. So how can you practice crucial conversations? I think there's a bunch of ways to do that. They don't really dive into it, but just think about like role-playing conversations for skill building. I also think mindfulness and meditation are going to be helpful here. If you can practice detachment, then you can step outside of the argument and say, okay, we're having this argument. The argument is not me. And you can analyze, you can dual process the argument from a detached mindful state, basically. This paragraph right here is super crucial because it sums up what the chapter is going to do for us. We're going to watch for 3 different conditions: the moment a conversation turns crucial, signs that people don't feel safe, psychological safety, and then our style under stress. We're going to consider our own style under stress. Spotting a crucial conversation, we know when a conversation turns to an important topic, so we should be watching for the topical content shift, but the authors go through some sort of like emotional intelligence, like reading people, which is not so much determining whether the conversation is crucial in the sense of topical importance, but in the sense of someone is starting to feel unsafe. So these are 2 different ways that a conversation can be crucial. Unfortunately, the word does mean both. So when we talk about a crucial conversation, we're talking about a topically important conversation, but we're also talking about a relationally important conversation. So watch for physical signals. The authors are talking about signals in yourself, okay? Maybe your stomach gets tight, they say. But I would say that you can also reflect on these for others. Notice emotions, raise tone of voice, things like this, behavioral cues. Behavioral cue could be someone standing up to go to the whiteboard. Maybe they have a habit of going to the whiteboard when topics get important, or fidgeting, or things like this. I would also beware of denial from others. You may notice that others are getting more emotional. That doesn't mean that it's smart to call it out, right? Don't tell people, I notice you're getting emotional. There may be a role for that, but in general, you want to be mindful of it without necessarily calling it out. So when you become aware of these things, how should you react? Should you call the person out for being emotional? No, you should keep a constant vigil on for safety. So you want to create a safe space for the conversation. And I would say if that can't be done, sometimes it can't be done, I would say one tactic is just give up on the conversation for now, and you can have a better conversation later. If the conversation gets off the rails, if you went from talking about a project to talking about the sports game on Saturday, sometimes it is practical to just let it go. And then have another follow-up conversation later. When you become aware of behavioral or emotional issues, you want to try to build a graceful exit for others. So we've found cases where psychological safety is absent and the signs of that. What about when it's present? How do you actually know? A clear heuristic is when it's safe, you can say anything. The reality is there are very few work environments that have true and full psychological safety. So you can be an advocate to build this at your company. The authors go back into signs of a lack of psychological safety. They say when you fear people aren't buying into your ideas, you might start pushing too hard. I have personally found that side projects are a great way to release steam in this regard. If you have a genuinely good idea and your work environment doesn't want to accept it, good. You can go do that thing yourself now without fear for like a conflict of interest because you brought it up at work and they rejected it, right? So side projects for programming anyway, I think are underrated. If you're not a programmer, you might need to think about other ways to do that. And the authors go back into more signs of a lack of psychological safety. They say people generally become defensive when they don't feel safe. So if people are acting defensive, that could be a quick mental model that, okay, this conversation is lacking psychological safety, and what can I do to build a better environment? Important caveat that safety is not synonymous with comfort. I think if we take a gym-like, exercise-like mental model, we could realize that a high level of safety with strategic discomfort could be an optimal path to growth. I think that's an interesting mental model. When it's unsafe, you start to go blind. I think this is sort of reiterating things that have already been said, but that is because I'm approaching this with the meditation and mindfulness mindset. Basically, it's hard to meditate under distraction, but also you can practice meditating under distraction and become better at it. So that could be a way to help prepare yourself for conversations going off the rails, basically. So the prior conversation on defensiveness assumes that you can detect defensiveness, but what are some of the signs of a person becoming defensive, whether in yourself or in someone else? The authors suggest that defensive behavior typically falls into two buckets: a silent under stress type and a violent under stress type. More specific forms of silence include masking, avoiding, and withdrawing. The authors suggest that violent speech includes attempts to convince, control, and compel others. I actually disagree with this. I think trying to convince, persuade, or influence is not violent. Compel, I agree. Compelling, or the use of minimization or deception and interrupting, I think these are violent strategies. Even speaking in absolutes, I don't think that's violent. I think it's just simplistic and erroneous and often a poor communication strategy. I don't think poor communication makes violence. So I think speaking in absolutes is generally a bad idea, but I don't take it to be violent. I would also say down here, they talk about labeling and stereotyping. These, again, I think are often bad, but I don't think that they're violent. And sometimes they're actually useful. If you're trying to label to simplify the conversation, or if you're trying to use absolutes to prune branches that the conversation might go down, you're basically making a trade, and that trade is often bad, but it's actually sometimes good, which is the idea that a simple mental model might not be an ideal mental model, but it can actually crystallize the conversation. So when you read through the section on violence, I encourage you to break apart tools which are genuinely deceptive or violent versus tools which could be used to simplify a conversation, sort of two-edged swords that you want to be careful with, but they can actually sometimes be useful. And then on to the last section is determining your own style under stress. So now you've determined that a stressful situation is going on. After you know what's going on, you can look for your behavioral changes. Personally, I think that I turn into a bit of a rusher, where if I realize the meeting's running out of time, I want to drop my most important notes. This is really cool. They have a test that you can go through, and then they tell you how you can add them up. And basically, you can then bucket yourself and stereotype yourself. Notice that they said that stereotyping is violence, but now we're supposed to stereotype ourselves. So I think this shows that actually I'm right, that stereotyping is a tool for simplicity. It's a two-edged sword that's often not useful, but occasionally it is useful. And so I would stereotype myself according to this rubric as a relatively silent kind of person. Some of the questions here I think are like not ideal. So the start with heart questions, I think there's a poor structural match because they don't actually deal with starting a conversation. And I've read that chapter and it didn't help me much with those particular questions. But anyway, overall, I think the tool is really interesting and useful. And this could be kind of like your team might do personality surveys to get to know each other. This could be a good way to get to know each other's like communication strategy under stress. I think that could be a great tool for your team. In addition, this tool is meant to help you understand which chapters are going to be of particular value to you. So I look forward to reading chapters 9 and 10. I hope you'll follow along for that. When looking for the style under stress, they note that technical, like conversations using technology or virtual conversations, it's going to regulate the amount of data you have access to, whether you're texting or email or doing a video call or an in-person conversation. So they say that a better data stream gives you better insight into the conversation. And so they sort of like rank order the ability to communicate face-to-face would be best, and video conferencing, they sort of rank order it that way. I would also say take notes, right? Taking notes about the conversation is going to be a great technique. And that's it. So to recap, we want to learn to look in this chapter. We want to learn to look for when the conversation turns crucial so we can turn on our additional techniques. We want to look and build bridges for safety problems. Look for whether you or others are moving towards silence or violence, and learn your own style under stress. Know yourself. Know your own style under stress and work to actively mitigate that if possible. I hope you'll join me for the next chapter, where we are going to learn more techniques about making it safe.